vs Blackbeard is one of the more recent fights we've gotten in One Piece that totally messes with the power scaling in the series. And I say this because people don't pay as much attention to all of the details in the fight and the context as to why certain things happen in the fight as well. As with all due respect to Law, for him to actually give Blackbeard a close fight a week or two after how he was performing against Big Mom without any training periods is very inconsistent. So in this video, I'll be breaking this fight down panel by panel to show you guys how this fight wasn't as close as you may think. Before we start, please be sure to hit that subscribe button down below to support the channel for future One Piece content like this. The first showing of this fight is in chapter 1063, where we see Blackbeard use what some people think was Conqueror's Haki, but I think was just the powers of the Gura Fruit, which is used to attack and do solid damage to Law's submarine, forcing Law to fight against the Blackbeard pirates. As his crew mentions now how there is no way for them to escape this. Then we see that Doc Q's Devil Fruit powers turn the Heart Pirates into women, but we then get to see Law break away from these effects with the use of Haki, showing off his experience from Wano. Doc Q then flies in and notes how Law nullified his Devil Fruit powers with his own Haki, and he notes how it's because Law did this that his own antibodies will spread to his crew, just like how Doc Q's disease did in the first place. So this is how Law was able to change his crewmates back into men. Then we see Van Augur teleport him and Burgess to the island, where Burgess throws this mountain at the Heart Pirates, and it's about to crush them, but Law creates a room big enough to cover the whole mountain and destroys it. On the next panel, when we see Law again, we see him now huffing and puffing after stopping this attack from Burgess, which shows that for Law to defend against this, he had to actually exert himself a good bit. Not saying he isn't at full power or anything, don't worry, but I think this is still something we have to acknowledge to be fair to Law. Then Blackbeard flies over to Law, where he reveals how his plan was to go after whichever of the three sailed here from Wano, and that he clearly knows Law has at least one road poneglyph since he came from Wano, and it's from here where Law and Blackbeard declare this battle as a winner-takes-all fight, especially since there is a poneglyph on Pirate Island. This fight then continues, starting off on the next chapter, 1064, and in the first panel, we see Blackbeard preparing to punch Law with a Quake Fist, and Law then uses his awakening, covering Stronger with Reroom, and then using Amputate on him, which cuts him in half and sends him, Blackbeard, and Doc Q straight to the ground. Blackbeard's reaction to this also shows that Blackbeard didn't know the full scope of what Law could do, as he literally says that he didn't know Law could do that, catching him off guard, which is clearly referring to the fact that he knew nothing about Law's awakening, specifically because we know he fought at least alongside Law at the Rocky Port incident, which also could show where Blackbeard's attitude is coming into the fight. We know Blackbeard has a thing of underestimating his opponents because he thinks he's the strongest, which Whitebeard mentions, and because of that, Blackbeard has basically fought everyone we see on screen with this mindset, which leads him to get caught with an attack. So just adding that on there, as Blackbeard is now fighting someone who he has at the very least seen fought before. I also want to note as well how Law specifically attacks Stronger, because it's kind of clear that inside of Law's rooms, he just doesn't have the Haki to be able to attack Blackbeard. So he went for the next best thing. Right afterwards, Blackbeard throws a Quake Punch while still falling in the air, which just forces them even further through the air, and they now all hit the ground where the rest of the Heart Pirates are at. So Blackbeard and his two crewmates take the shockwave, but Law is not in the panel, so I don't really know if Law was even hit by this. No one really knows. But also, as Blackbeard, Doc Q, and Stronger fall, we see Doc Q drop his exploding apples on the Heart Pirates that are below them, and it's Penguin who dives into the sea and intercepts Doc Q, preventing his attacks from hurting everyone else in the crew, and we just see him handle him from there. And something a lot of people like to mention is that Law was getting jumped by Blackbeard and all of the people he brought with him, and these panels are very helpful as they show that Law isn't getting jumped by the Blackbeard pirates, and it also shows that Law has people who he can depend on to handle some of Blackbeard's commanders, even if the Heart Pirates are one of the more weaker pirate crews we've seen in the New World. And we see on the next page as Jean Bart stops Van Augur from sniping Law, which gives Law the time to coat his sword in K-Room and land a Shock Willy on Blackbeard. When Law actually threw this attack, attack, he had to extend his sword out as he can't teleport when using this as the room is coating his sword. So while standing from where he is, he sends his sword out at Blackbeard. Now, where Law attacked Blackbeard from, whether it being from the front or from behind him, is something a lot of people argue over, and I'm not even gonna lie, I don't really think it matters too much, as Blackbeard doesn't even seem to be focused on Law. He mainly is focused on just trying to land on the ground, and after he gets hit, he's not sure at all of what just hit him. And Law also just stabbed Blackbeard as he was still falling through the air, and we see in the previous panel, when we last saw Doc Q, that Penguin handles him while he is still falling, and at the bottom of this page, we legit see Van Augur looking up at Blackbeard as he's falling down while hurt from Law's Durineg. And this just makes it practically impossible for him to evade it, especially when Blackbeard does not have any abilities for mobility, at least while he's in the air like Law does, who could just teleport around while in a room, for example. And it's not like Law blitzed him. As we know later on, Blackbeard goes to counter this exact same attack, where nothing has changed from Law. If anything, it's only different on Blackbeard's end, as he clearly is more prepared for not only just overall combat, as he no longer is falling through the air, but for this attack specifically. And I think this is a lot more consistent, because otherwise you'd be arguing that Law's speed changes dramatically over the course of a few panels. Van Augur then saves Blackbeard after he's clearly out of it for a second because of how much Law's attack hurts, which is doubled for Blackbeard. As we know, the Yami Yami fruit makes him feel more pain than normally, but after this, Van Augur asks Blackbeard if they should return to the ship, and he tells Van Augur to stay on the offensive. From here, Law notes how all of Blackbeard's commanders have devil fruit powers, and Law notes how all of them share the same weakness, that being the ocean. In my opinion, I think that this is important because it's clear Law is doing one of two things. He is either mapping an escape route for him and his crew, or planning on using his teleportation powers to try and drop some of Blackbeard's commanders into the water. It's clear that the Heart Pirates are unmatched, at least in the long run, and with all of Blackbeard's crewmates being devil fruit users and Law having teleportation abilities, he does have a massive advantage if he wants to try and lure them out, to try and kill them, or as a way to get his crew out of there, where the Blackbeard pirates can't really follow them, as Law is the only devil fruit user we know of out of the notable members of his crew, and they travel in a submarine, which gives them another way of escape if they go under the water. But the problem is, in order for Law to do that, he needs to still get past Blackbeard. Law then uses his sword, coated in K-Room, and tries to use Shock Willy on Blackbeard again, but this time, Blackbeard is able to punch Law's sword away, and counters this with his own shockwave. Now, this is probably the big feat people like to use from this fight to scale Law to Blackbeard, and it's clear from a speed perspective that Law swung first, and Blackbeard just punched his sword away, given Law's range, but also from an AP perspective, in terms of stopping the other, because people refer to this as a clash. If you want to refer this as that, you're not entirely wrong, but you do just have to understand that Law does just have the advantage, as he is swinging this big ass sword, which clearly overlaps Blackbeard's fist, which is very much so below Law's sword. It's not like Blackbeard is even clashing with the tip of the blade like some sort of Garb vs. Chinjiao clash. Right here, Blackbeard's fist is fully below the sword, making it so much easier for Law, as he just needs to apply force downwards to overpower Blackbeard, which is a lot easier than what Blackbeard has to do in his position. Law literally just has gravity on his side, which results in Law needing less energy. And then Blackbeard clearly uses his darkness to nullify the K-Room coating on Law's sword, and it's from there where the fight cuts out. Now, let's refresh our memories real quick. This fight starts in chapter 1063, and the last panel of this fight appears in chapter 1083. But it's only 3 of these chapters that actually include this fight, and because the fight cuts on chapter 1064 and almost 20 chapters pass, people like to see it as Law was putting up a fight for all that time. We know that when we cut back to the Straw Hats, after all of these chapters that include Sabo at the Reverie, Kobe's rescue, and all that happens, we see how a significant span of time passes since when we last saw the Straw Hats in chapter 1078, and Law vs. Blackbeard was something we first saw at the start of the arc. So putting 2 to 2 together, you get this interpretation that Law was fighting him for hours. And if you've seen my Zoro vs. Lucci fight analysis video, if you haven't, you can check it out if you want, it's up to you. But in that video, I go into how many chapters can pass and how so many events could be happening at around the same time, despite the chapters that fly by. And I think that happens here. We see the result of this fight in chapter 1081, and Oda is showing the results of this fight while he is also showing us what is happening at Blackbeard's home base. Even in this chapter, Kuzan tells Kobe how he can't go running off while Blackbeard is not there. Oda cut off this fight for a reason. He clearly wanted to make us feel the suspense of not knowing what was going to happen to Law, and the best time to reveal that was while the Blackbeard pirates became relevant to the plot again, as before Oda was dealing with Shanks and Kid, setting up Sabo in the Reverie, and the main story of the Straw Hats at Egghead. So they fight, then Oda reveals to us what happens, then the events at Pirate Island conclude, which is then where we cut back to the Straw Hats, and this insane amount of time passes in between. It's not even a case where it's like all of these hours pass right after, as it's not even noted until after the battle at Pirate Island is over, because the events on Egghead before 1089 and onwards take place in a different day, as they are in a separate day's paper, which we see at the start of the chapter. And when we come back, we see Law's submarine, the Polar Tang has been destroyed, and Law and his crew have been taken out, and Blackbeard standing in front of him and Beppo with Burgess and Van Augur. I also want to note as well that they seem to be standing in the same position as before on the island, where they are near the shore. And it's from this panel that people take things into their own hands in terms of figuring out what happened, which is not a problem, but it leads to all these different outcomes, such as Blackbeard jumping Law with Van Augur and Burgess. Even if you want to say Blackbeard didn't just beat Law when he first used Black Vortex, but regardless, these powers just lead to Blackbeard negating Law's hacks as well, which means his AP by default, as Law relies on his Duraneg to damage you, which is why I just think it's really hard to say Law put up a good fight with Blackbeard, being such a hard counter, especially now that Blackbeard understands what Law's attacks could do to him. And then, as Blackbeard was about to go over there and straight up take Law's Devil Fruit powers, Beppo transforms into Sulong, where he attacks all three of them. And it's very clear that Blackbeard is just very shocked as to how this is possible, especially when the Minks are known to transform into this, specifically when under the moon. And then Law and Beppo make their escape. So yeah, I don't really think Law had done anything of significance here to change his scaling at all, especially in comparison to where he scales in regards to the Yonko, where it's very clear that he scales massively below them.